Hey there, Seahawks. It's Miss Adams, and in this video, we're going to look at assessing the fit of regression models. Sometimes a linear model is not appropriate to use for certain data sets. So when checking to see if a linear model is appropriate, you want to look for a few things. One, is the scatter plot of the data roughly linear? So when you make your scatter plot with your XY data, does it roughly look like it's going in a linear pattern? Two, how strong is the correlation coefficient? Remember, that's R. And the higher, the better. You want it to be as close to 1 or -1 as possible. And then, what does the residual plot look like? So when looking at the residual plot, you want to see a mess of points with no obvious curve or pattern. How to make a residual plot. All right, so first you have to calculate the residual for each observed value. Okay, so remember that your residual is your actual minus your predicted. And then plot them on the graph using your original x-axis. So you keep your x-axis the same, and you plot the residual amount, which is actual minus predicted. Some of them are going to be positive, some of them are going to be negative. Or you can do this on your TI-84. Okay, so first you have to run the linear regression. So when you have your data in your list, list 1 and list 2, you have to do stat calc 8 to run the linear regression. Your calculator automatically creates a list after that called resid. So to get it to graph that list, you're going to do second y equals, which is up at the top, which is your stat plots option. You're going to pick the scatter plot type. For the X list, you're going to have list 1. For the Y list, you're going to change it to the resid list. So to get the option with all of the lists, you're going to hit second and then the stat button, which is the list options. And if you go to the bottom, you should see the list called resid. And then once you have that in there, you're going to press zoom 9 and you'll see your residual plot. And remember, you want to see it scattered with no obvious curve or pattern. All right, so above is the residual plot from our example in 3.5 about baseball pitchers. Do you think a linear model is appropriate for the data set? Okay, so if you look at the residual plot, there's not a whole lot of a curve or a pattern going on. It's just kind of a mess of points. So the residual plot is scattered with no obvious curve or pattern. Therefore, a linear model is appropriate. Okay, the best would be if they're really close to the line at 0, which means you have few residuals, which means your predictions were close to what you actually got. But you want to see some of your residuals positive, some of your residuals are negative. Those sorts of things is what you're looking for. All right, so here is a scatter plot, and then I have a few questions. So here's our scatter plot with a line of best fit drawn. Which graph so the residual plot matches the data in the scatter plot to the left? Okay, so I have graphs of residual plots, and I want to match it to the scatter plot on the left. All right, so I'm going to look at each dot and how far away it is from my line of best fit. So this first one, it's pretty much right on the line. So in my residual plot, it's going to be right on my line. It's going to be right at 0. There is no residual. They all have that when x is 1. When x is 2, I have a very small positive residual because my actual value, which is where that black dot is higher than my predicted value, which would be on that blue line. All right, so if I did my bigger number minus a smaller number, I get a positive residual. Okay, so I'm looking for 2. It has to be positive. I already ruled out the C because that one didn't have a residual right on the line. So for 2, they both have very small positive residuals. So I'm going to move on to the third dot, which has a little bit larger positive residual, which A has a higher positive residual, and so does B. And then when I look at when x is 4, I see that I have a negative residual this time. Okay, so my point should be below the line on the residual plot, which is only true for option A. So option A is the residual plot that matches this scatter plot. Then it asks, would a linear model be appropriate? So if I look, the scatter plot seems to be pretty linear. The points are kind of forming a line. Not a perfect line, but pretty close. And then the residual plot doesn't really have a pattern. It doesn't have an obvious curve. So yes, a linear model is appropriate because the residual plot has no obvious curve or pattern. All right, go Seahawks.